Others, he's and she's, welcome to episode number 117 of my anime podcast. I am your host Yata, and joining me on the cast today is my co-host with the most, our ethereal boy child made flesh, Taka of the Golden Fang.
I am all of you, and you are all me, and together we are my anime podcast.
Welcome one, welcome all to this latest edition of my anime podcast. This 117th edition of my anime podcast. How are you today, dear listeners? How are you today, dear co-host? On this finest of morns, afternoons, / evenings in Mananimaland.
I'm doing just fine. Coming back off of a nice long weekend and feeling a little bit rested. Definitely ready to be through the retrograding, if you know what I mean, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, the long weekend was definitely good for recharging the batteries, convalescing the spirit. However, one element of my life is definitely jaded, and that is this retrograde.
Yeah.
If last week was the Wheel of Ages, this is definitely the Millstone episode. So close to finishing. Happy that we did, but it's definitely feeling its age at this point as we do our 5th consecutive retrograde episode.
I will just share a little bit. I went out of town this weekend. It was fun. It was one of those trips that was overplanned, so there was a lot of walking from here to there, but we did a lot. 2 things I will mention real quick that are very tangentially related. One, we went to a place called Ten Drum in Tainan, and we watched this traditional Japanese drum performance. You know,
taiko drums?
Taiko drums, yeah. They're pretty internationally renowned. They had this thing that flashed up a bunch of like Grammy awards that they had won, and I gotta say, this performance was sensational. Like, if the listeners, if you yourself ever make it to Tainan, are into some taiko drums, this is the place to go. And it's actually inside of this repurposed sugar factory. So there are all these giant factory buildings that have been transformed into new things, and they have other things there. Like, they've got this zip line course that you can do, and there's these giant slides that go down, and on the very top of this 6-story factory building, they have this giant swing that you can sit in. It's kind of like a patio swing, but it's on top of this building, and it kind of swings off of the edge of the building, so it feels like you're just suspended in air. And then right next to that place is the Chime Museum, which is one of the better history museums that I've ever been to. I mean, I've never been to the Smithsonian, but I would imagine that it's in the same echelon. They had this awesome history of armor and arms, I guess, all the weaponry and stuff, and they had this beautiful display of like Japan through the ages and how they evolved from being mostly bow-based to like the evolution of the katana, and they had all the different iterations all the way through time, and it was a blast, man. Definitely some cool things to check out in Tainan.
Just for the record, anyone who's listening who probably doesn't know what Tainan is a city in the south of Taiwan. Tai as in the Thai in Taiwan, and Nan as in south in Chinese.
Probably should have mentioned that. Yeah.
It's all right. It's pretty easy in Taiwan for anyone who's listening. If you've heard Taipei, which is actually Taipei in Chinese, which is Tai North, Taichung, where we live, which is Tai Central, and then Tainan, which is Tai South. And there's also a Taidong, which is Tai East, for convenience. And they're all pretty large cities, I guess with the exception of Taidong, which is, I guess, large by Irish standards, but backwatery by Taiwanese standards, or Asian standards, I would say. We're in the land of super cities and all that jazz. Bit of anime news this time around. I was speaking last week about watching Wonder Egg Priority. Got an update on Friday. SSSS Dynazeon debuted. First episode. Woo boy. Kind of went buck wild on that one. Did like a Twitter live reactions thread to the episode as I was watching it. It got picked up by the Transformers community for some inexplicable reason. Bunch of big YouTube Transformer people retweeting my tweet. Thoroughly impressed by that episode. Hopefully we can chat about it at some point in the near future, because they went places. So I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but I guess it's a slight spoiler, as in I was surprised by it. I didn't know this was going to happen. If SSS make sure I'm doing this right. SSSS. I am using my fingers. Gridman was the Tokusatsu. This is the SSSS Super Sentai.
Oh, okay.
It was basically Power Rangers, and Dynazeon is what you'd imagine. It goes from Megazord to Dino Megazord.
Whoa. Whoa.
Like the new characters, as you expect, it's Trigger, so they look great.
Yeah.
Super idiosyncratic, beautiful animation as always. Maybe even a level up in terms of animation. Have to think about it though, because could be recency bias. The one thing I'll notice though is the sound design is phenomenal. I was really in love with the sound design of SS Gridman. It kind of Eva inspires sound design. This time around, it's really, really good. And they blasted out the original OP from Gridman. Not the Gridman, but the actual.
Not the original, but from the SSSS.
Yeah, which you'll hear later on in this episode. Delighted that it's back. Did not think I was going to be so excited for it until I started watching it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been that hyped for an anime debut since, dude, I don't even remember. Very happy. Almost a shame that we're not covering on the weekly watches to discuss it.
I'm down. I'm fully down. I definitely watched way more Power Rangers than I did any sort of tokusatsu.
Here's a super Catholic story from my childhood. I'm from a big family, big Irish family, not to be stereotypical. Big Irish Catholic family, not to be even more stereotypical. But I remember making my communion. I was like 7 years old, my first communion, and spending all the money that I made from my communion that I was allowed to spend, not all of it, but quite a portion of it on Power Rangers swag.
Yeah.
Coming from a large family, let's put it this way, I made that toy store rain.
Rain and Megazords.
And Dragon Swords. And Tommy's blade that kind of was a pipe as well. Not like a crack pipe, like a pan pipe.
Yeah.
I don't know why crack pipe was the first one that went into my mind. Like it could have been a water pipe or a Sherlock Holmes pipe, tobacco pipe.
How do you think they have the energy to fight evil all day, you know?
Yeah. Getting up at the crack of dawn. Fatal deviations. All right, we're doing this. It's the last set of shows that we need to cover, and there are some big ratings on this one. So stay tuned for that. And I think we're over the worst of the bad ratings, or are we? Nothing's going to beat Arya the Scarlet Ammo, that's for sure. That is definitely set its flag in history as the worst of the bunch. But there are a couple of hiccups impending. So we're going to have some music, going to do some pluggage, and then we're going to go on the other side of this. So guys, if you like what you hear and you want to help out the podcast, you know what you can do. Tap on your tap machines and head on over to iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you catch your podcasts and catch some words from your brain, pluck them out, type them on the computer and send them off into the internet in the form of a 5-star review. It would be greatly appreciated. We would love you forever. And it keeps the lights on here in Mananima Land. So please do that now. You can also head over to Twitch, My Anime Podcast on Twitch. Head over to YouTube, My Anime Podcast on YouTube, and Yata-kun on YouTube too. You can head on over to myanimepodcast.com, click all the social media links there, and you can follow, like, subscribe, get in touch, all that stuff via the links on the My Anime Podcast page. And there's also a Discord that you can join. That link is also on myanimepodcast.com. Go subscribe, follow, review, write, cleanse, pillage, do all the good stuff that you can do to help out the podcast. We would love you forever and ever. And we are back, and it is time for the Retrograde, the final installment of this amazing saga. And we start off with an amazing saga of its own, Vinland Saga.
One of the most amazing sagas that we have ever witnessed, apparently. According to the score, for characters, Yata and I were tied at 5 apiece. For plot, we were also tied at 5 apiece. For visual art, Yata said 4.0 and I went 4.5. For sound, we were both at 4.5. For enjoyment, we were both at 5.0 for a total score of 4.75.
This was the aforementioned second highest rated show ever from the previous episode that we didn't get around to. And what a way to start the day. It's like starting with dessert. What a show.
Yeah, to sink or swing, this one definitely swims. Not swing, but swim.
I was thinking, how's he going to play say that, and you acknowledged it.
I've got swings on the mind after that crazy swing on the rooftop experience. This was equally exhilarating, I will have to say. This is one of the best pieces of media I think I've ever witnessed. It was an amazing story, amazing characters. I mean, as you can see down the line, the scores are great. And the visuals were amazing too. It doesn't mean just because that was the one that wasn't a 5 or a 4.5 from yourself that those were lacking. They were right up there. It was just that everything else was so good. It was almost flawless. And it was such an easy show to just get lost in.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of docked some points off on the nautical animation. As in, I didn't love the boats and I didn't love the sea. And there was quite a lot of time spent in boats and at sea.
Yeah, I was going to say, without that follow-up, that sounds very nitpicky. Considering it's about Vikings on the sea, that's fair.
And a yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum for their pirate companions. Yeah, dude, this show is fantastic. I have, on several occasions, went back and watched episode 22 and 24 again, just because they're just maybe two of my favorite anime episodes ever. Just for context, episode 22 is when Askeladd has his final duel with our intrepid protagonist, I guess, Thorfinn. And 24 is when Askeladd chops the head off of a certain Swainy bastard. Jesus, dude, those two episodes are so freaking good. And there's about 5 episodes in this series that are just all-timers. The Road to Damascus moment for Canute is an all-timer as well.
The Thorkel versus Thorfinn fight as just like an amazing duel, a battle of wits. True David and Goliath moment.
Another one I thought was really fantastic, it's really stuck with me, was the episode where it's from the point of view of the English settlers. And we have this young girl who has stolen or come across or come upon this item of jewelry that was not hers, and she was sort of coveting it, and well, she got divine punishment, I guess, if you're a fanatical Christian folk. Just a beautiful episode. Show's great. OPs, EDs, fantastic. Survive Says the Prophet, is that what it's called? Mukanjo. God, that song is so freaking good. I said The Promised Neverland was probably the strongest of the watch-alongs we did. I meant it was the strongest of the watch-alongs we did until we started watching Vinland Saga.
It had been the strongest until that point, and then very swiftly and thoroughly usurped by the usurper, Vinland Saga.
All right, well, it's only downhill from there, I'm afraid, because we move on to a great show in its own right, but it's not Vinland Saga. Unfortunately, it has to follow that, and it is Gridman.
Gridman.
目を覚ませ僕らの世界が何者かに侵略されてるぞ
Characters, I gave it a 4.0. Taka gave it a 4.0 for characters as well. Plot, I gave it a 3.0. Taka gave it a 3.0 also. The visual arts, I gave it a 5.0, as did Taka. Sound, I went for 5.0. Taka went for a 4.5. Enjoyment, I went for a 4.0. And Taka went for a 4.0. Rounded all together, we got a 4.15 out of 5. So, Gridman, it's got a big spot in my heart. But I didn't want to let that influence my ever so objective judging. I think the show is fantastic. On the record saying it's fantastic. Watched it a lot.
Yeah, you did.
An unhealthy amount. And that's why watching Dinozoan, or whatever it's called, that's definitely not what it's called. Dinobots. SSS Dinosaurus. It's weird how intimately familiar I was with the production technique and the staff that was working on it because of the time investment spent in SSSS Gridman. But it's worth it. I recently watched a video where they went in pretty fine detail through all the Transformers references from the show, and it was incredible, the level of detail. You just never have got it unless you were really, really in the Transformer culture, which I wasn't. I was more fascinated from an animation perspective and other influences like Evangelion and the Tokusatsu influences like the original Gridman and Ultraman. The series is like a goldmine. There is a bit of a treasure hunty element, I would say, to it, for better or for worse, but I thought the story was solid. I thought the character design was excellent. I thought the characters were great. I thought the acting was fantastic. Animation's Trigger, so you know what you're going to get, but it's also Trigger, so you also have to bear in mind the fact that for every hit, there's also that kind of element. I've never seen a Trigger show that I'm like, yeah, that's the perfect Trigger show. There's always caveats to Trigger for whatever reason, but this is my favorite Trigger show, I would say.
I think that Trigger just doesn't hold back. They're not as well refined. They're just kind of raw energy. And when they decide to do something, they do it all the way. And that can turn people off who are looking for a more refined, middle of the road approach.
Do you ever get the sense that they're the most unapologetically otaku of all the animation Animation studios. And because of that, though, they also have the problematic otaku elements that sometimes just don't really transatlanticize the same way you would like.
Comes off like they're proud otakus. They fully embrace that side of themselves, and more power to them for that. I feel like they have stronger, more passionate projects because of it, and I wouldn't want them to change. I agree that SSSS Gridman is a work of art. It's not without its flaws, as all Trigger shows tend to have. This isn't my favorite. You've dug in way deeper than I have, but coming in from like a surface level to how deeply you've dug in, I think there's enjoyment at both levels. If you just watch it one time without knowing any of the references, I think it's still a solid piece of entertainment. And if you really know what you're looking for, this can be a very rewarding treasure hunt, as you said. And what a way to kick off Easter weekend, by the way. A little egg hunt in SSSS Dinosaurus.
Dinosaurs Maximus. Like the Vinland Saga episode, there was a couple of iconic episodes for me. Obviously, episode number 1. Episode number 9 is probably the episode of the series. That's the dream one, where Yuta, Rika, and Utsumi all get trapped in the tendrils of this dream kaiju. Episode 6 as well was a really cool episode when Yuta took the train out of Tsutsujidai with the Froppy kaiju, Kaijo Shoujo Ansolius. She didn't really have a name, but she's in reference to a music kaiju from the original series. That episode was trippy as hell. It was so cool. And while Yuta was off having his date with her, going outside of the city, Akane was with Utsumi and Rika was with Auntie. And it was just a really cool episode. Lots of cool scenes.
I think that was my favorite one too.
They were the 3 standout episodes, and it was a standout series. I think it's severely underrated, but you know, that's what it is. That's what it is.
But obviously rated enough to get a follow-up.
Yeah, well, it's just pure otaku bait though, right? There's no way every geek in Japan is not just like geeking out over this. It hits all of the marks. If you're like a mech head or a tokusatsu fan or a Super Sentai fan or a Transformers fan or an anime fan, I'm in for this. It just pulls from all these really extreme nerdy fandoms, and it's so fan servicey in terms of all of the Easter eggs and in terms of the characters, and it's Trigger. So
in every way. Yeah.
And it's also like Akira Amamiya, right? One of the big dicks at Trigger. You kind of got to let him do what you want to do, right? You can't really stop him. And I guess it was quite commercially successful. Like, I definitely felt like Rika and Akane broke the internet for a while.
Yeah, they did.
Yay, Gridman 4.15. Happy with that. Moving on.
All right, our next ungraded show is Keep Your Hands Off Ezoken.
一丁らバリ溶け込んで戦闘モードなんだこりゃどうせやるならめんどくさくなろうぜ何をにするのさ easy
From episode 97, the characters, Yata and I were tied at 5.0. Those were some great characters, a nice little threesome. The plot, Yata had it at 3.0, I said 3.5. Visual art, 5.0 apiece, outstanding work. Sound, 4.5 apiece, very solid, and enjoyment was 4.0 apiece. So we were pretty in line here for a final score of 4.35.
Best show of last year. Simple as that.
Yeah.
I thought this show was remarkable. I think this might be the thing that I've enjoyed the most that Misaki Yasa has put out.
Yes, because it feels like the show that he enjoyed making the most. Like, it just really feels like a piece of his soul.
Yeah. It's almost like self-indulgent.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a negative, right? But it's a positive when it's him being self-indulgent.
You never knew how much you didn't know and that you wanted to know about how anime is made. Or at least I didn't until I watched the show.
Yeah, it was a crash course in animation and the grinds of it all. I think the most remarkable thing about this, and it is a show full of remarkable elements, it has to be the voice acting. Like, these are 3 essentially no-names. Just a couple of young seiyus who never really had any credits to their name. They just come out here and just blow it out of the water. Now, obviously, Sayaka, she's been around. Midori and Subane's VAs were like noobs. They had about as much voice acting credentials as we have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just feel like they've been doing this forever, and they're just masters.
They tore it up.
Yeah, and that extends to the characters because they really help bring those characters to life. I, at all times, would oscillate between adoring all 3 of those characters.
There wasn't a one bad apple in the bunch.
Absolutely not. And special shout out to Domeki as like the 4th girl.
Yeah.
Fantastic characters as well. I loved her passion for sound. The show was just a pleasure to behold. On top of like the great acting, the great characters, the animation was stellar. It was a 5.0 show. It's one of those things where there's 5.0s and there's 5.0s. Like Mob Psycho is a 5.0. Izoken is a 5.0 like that. Those episodes, man, when they would like let themselves be, I guess, autistic for want of a better word, and just really like taste the rainbow with their vision. It was incredible. Experiencing it through a character like Midori. It was so unique for anime, I think. You know, it really showed the power of animation. You get to be creative, not just through your storytelling, but through your visuals. And there's a lot of shows that just don't do that, or they don't do it as ambitiously or as creatively
Yeah,
as this, you know?
It really felt like they were taking full advantage of the medium in a way that I think SSSS Gridman did as well. They took full control of everything visually to make it what it was, and in a similar way, but from a completely different perspective. That's what we got from Eizouken, and it makes you want to go out there and learn how to make anime. It was just like such a refreshing experience, and I know it's not the first show that's ever been made about making anime, but I think it deserves a spot on the anime about anime Mount Rushmore.
There was Shirobaka. This is an important show in respect that not only is this like an important show showing how you create anime and how you interact with the visual element of the medium, I think it's also important for how one receives and grades an anime. I've had this discussion with Naraku a few times where he's so character and plot driven. He doesn't really separate, let's say, his appraisal of an anime from a live action show, right? Or a book or whatever, right? And I understand that like character and plot are obviously a big thing. They're 40% of what we grade our shows on. But another 20% on top of that is the animation, because it's such a visual medium and it's another way of expressing emotion, expressing creativity, expressing ideas, themes, all of the things that you're getting across for your characters and your plot, you're also getting across in your animation. And sometimes the animation will supersede the significance of the plot or the characters, depending on the kind of story you're telling. And with something like Yuasa, I think the animation tends to supersede it. With Ikuhara, I think he's more of a literary mind, where I think Yuasa is more of a visual one. Both geniuses, but just approaching the craft in a different way. I see like Yuasa being a sort of Brian Wilson, Beach Boys kind of lunatic, you know, when it comes to his craft. Because there's always interesting with him. It's never unexceptional. This is just a perfect example of that. And I just realized really quickly, so we're going to have a bit of a moment here, but we did do an episode on The Night a Short Girl Walk On.
We did.
Flippers, because I can't say the word I want to say. Okay, so I don't know what episode it was from, but I know we definitely did it. So what we're going to do, we're going to call it audible here. I'm going to set it up on the doc really, really quickly, and we're going to grade it at some point when we have a few moments as the show is recording. So while I'm doing this, Taka, can you tell us what is our next show?
Yes, the next show after Eizouken, in chronological logical order, is Tower of God, which we started episode 102. It was a weekly watch along. And going down the scores, characters, Yata said 4.5. I said 3.5. For plot, we were tied at 3.5. For visual art, Yata said 2.5 and I said 3.0. For sound, 3.5 from Yata, 4.0 from myself. And enjoyment, 4.0 from Yata, 3.5 for myself. We were pretty close at a final score of 18 to 17.5 for myself and a 3.55 out of 5.
Fun series, very fun series. I'm going to let Taka fill out the Night Short Girl bracket while I talk about Tower of God. The highlights of the show for me are twofold. One, it's the amazing soundtrack. Kevin Penkin killed it. There's also a cool little introduction to the world of K-pop, genre of music I was not overly familiar with outside of Blackpink and BTS. And even then, they were sort of superficial, as in I knew their names and not much else about them. But here we got these amazing OPs in several languages. Do you like Korean? Have a Korean version. You like Japanese? Here's the Japanese version. English, you say. It's your native tongue. Here you go. Couple that sound element with really fun characters. And it was a very fun experience. And I think the further I get away from it and the more I experience other Crunchyroll endeavors, I have to admit that this is the best of Crunchyroll so far for me. It's not a high bar, but that is the case.
Yeah, there've been some stinkers in the past. And for Tower of God, it was one of those shows where you never quite knew what to make of it week to week. So I am glad that we're having a chance to reflect. In the end, I think the plot didn't live up to what I was hoping for, and that there was these hints at this greater, grander, fleshed out fantasy world that I really wanted more of. I don't think we ever got that, and I've heard that it's coming down the line, and there's more to it. I've also heard things like the manhwa author, or it's a webtoon, right? The webtoon author has released exposition dumps in a way, and like on his blog to fill in gaps, and it just feels like maybe there is a lot there, but there's like too much for the story, almost a bit off more than you can chew kind of situation, and I'm going to temper my hopes for future seasons of Tower of God. I do think it has has potential, and I think it has the chops. I like a lot of the cast, probably aside from the main two characters,
Bam Bam and Rachel.
Bam Bam and Rachel. They were a bit bland for my liking, but it was a very wide cast, a wide net full of colorful characters. And there were moments where the animation really shined. There were also moments where it fell a little flat. And I think one of the highlights for me was just Kevin Penkin doing his Penkin thing.
Panking all over the soundtrack.
Just panking all over this place. It didn't really
Can't
feel
tell.
as cohesive of a package as Made in Abyss. But maybe that came from a little bit of the disjointedness of the plot itself. And it seems challenging to make a soundtrack for Tower of God because the tone was not consistent. Whereas Made in Abyss, it really had this visual texture. It seemed like it was pretty natural to create an audio texture to overlap and strengthen that for a final piece of media that was just completely immersive, whereas Tower of God felt a little bit more disjointed.
Yeah, I would say that the 3-word remit for Kevin Penkin for Made in Abyss might have been sweeping immersion, while with this one it felt more driven by atmosphere. There was this heightening of tension and this sort of otherness and strangeness that the tower sort of exuded, or it was hoping to exude. I didn't hate the animation, but the more I've had time to digest on it and sit on it, I didn't love it. It's very faithful to the original art though, so it's hard to be too whiny about it. But I kind of wonder if, say, Tower of God and God of High School got switched and Mappa handled this, how would that have looked? Hard to know.
It's hard to know, but it's something I really would like to know because we've had such good experiences with Mappa in the past. And maybe all they needed was the right webtoon to chew on.
Yeah. Well, from one odd fantasy to another, our next show is Decadence from episode 106. 'For characters, I gave it a 3.5. Taka gave it a 3.5 also. For plot, Taka gave it a 4.0. So did I. Visual art, we were both in agreement again, 3.5. Sound, 3.0 a piece. Enjoyment, 3.5 a piece. We're in concordance here. We got a 17.5 each and a 3.5 out of 5 for Decadence. This show surpassed my expectations.
Oh, definitely.
You had a hope that it would be good, right? You go into it and you're like, this trailer looks great, but will I be bitten here? And then you see it's from Studio Nut. You know, they're pretty good at what they do. They don't do much, but what they do, it's always been of a high standard. Get that first episode. It's great. Second episode, you're just so floored by the direction that they went. Madness, absolute madness. And I think a lot of people were just like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
A lot of us who hung around had to be convinced that this was the right call. But you know what? Looking back at it now, it's not without its flaws. There was a lot of conveniences plot-wise. But in saying that though, I found the characters very engaging. I loved the animation, except for the CG was ropey at times, especially later on. The final Gadol was a bit... Actually, most of the mecha Gadols, like the really big ones, I didn't think really held up under scrutiny. But the hand-drawn elements, character designs, the character movements, the actual world design itself was beautiful.
The background art, yeah, it was just...
stunning, yeah. The show had a lot of high points, you know, it wasn't a plateau of any description. It was a lot of ups and downs, but that sounds like a kind of a negative thing, right? I think this was more like a quirky ups and down. It almost kind of accentuated the experience, but you got this bold production for a seasonal anime that kind of came and went. It was super, super enjoyable. I don't regret covering this one at all. I don't regret watching it. And I probably would watch future installments in this kind of universe.
It was definitely something that caught me a lot off guard, as it did most of the people who were watching it week to week. And it wasn't just that episode too. It kind of had a whiplash where it was like, we're doing this. No, we're actually doing this. But wait a minute, it's
this.
There's more here. It's this. It's really this. And I think that they delivered way better than I could have hoped. If you'd have stopped me after episode 2, and I'm sure that a lot of people did, and said, I'm tuning out. But if you just stopped me and said, is this going to work? Are they going to follow through with something that I'm going to be happy with? I would have hedged on no. And we just happened to be covering it. And I was kind of locked in. And I'm so glad that I finished it out because there was way more plot here to digest than I think either of the fakes that we were thrown in the first couple of episodes. Good on you, Decadence. I think 3.5 is fair, though.
I would say that's fair. There is still issues. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay, so in all that faffing around and all that discussion, we managed to snake in a quick score for the night. It's Short Girl Walk On. Cannot for the life of me remember what episode we did it on, but we did do it. So here are our scores.
Yata gave the characters a 3.0, and I gave them a 3.5. For a plot, we were tied at 4.0. Visual art, tied at 5.0 apiece. Sound tied at 4.0 apiece. And enjoyment, Yata said 3.0, I said 4.0 for a final score of 3.95.
Good score. Honestly, I don't feel overly confident talking about this because I had so little time just to like process what was going on. I was bashing out these scores while Taka was introducing Tower of God, and I just went gut reaction for a lot of it. The plot and the characters for me are like there, and they're very fun, quirky. I think a lot of the joy of the show is actually the visual art and the weird, trippy nature of the show. Especially the last half hour gets pretty out there, like very, very out there. It's almost like an art piece, but doused with comedy. Yeah, I don't know if it's like a spiritual successor to Tatami Galaxy as such, but that's how I view it.
It definitely seems way more in line with that than a lot of the other Yuasa things.
I think what this lacks, by contrast to Keep Your Hands Off the Motion Picture Club, is a sense of like warmth and rooting interest in the characters themselves. It's so abstract and it's so artistic that it's almost sanitized from an emotional perspective. You're just kind of like engaging the frontal cortex, and synapses are going everywhere, and you're really just trying to, engage with the experience. I'm not really like falling in love with it emotionally the same way I was with Keep Your Hands Off Hisoken. But that's totally fine. Like, not everything needs to be this soppy fest.
If I had to sum it up real quickly, a wild ride that is worth your time. I don't think it's fair to really judge. It's hard, I will say at least, to judge movies on the same level and scale as we do seasonal anime because you just don't get enough time, right? It's crazy to think about how much time we get with characters especially in a 24 episode, like a 2-core season. But even in a 12 episode season compared to a 90-minute movie, 2-hour movie, there's just not as much time to develop those characters. And I think what Yuasa was doing here, it had completely different goals than something like Hands Off the Motion Picture Club. And I think that he definitely delivered on those goals. I thoroughly enjoyed this from top to bottom, probably more at the bottom, just because I felt like you had invested in this thing and the payoff was there. The payoff was real at the end.
Okay, we've officially done it. We have graded everything the podcast has ever covered as a collective. We now have official record of bastards and scores and animes from 117 episodes. There is one little addendum we're going to attach to this little project, and we're going to talk about that on the other side of this.
You and I are perfect strangers. We never wanna be alone. Looking up into the stars, we see them in the same light. You and I are perfect strangers. We never wanna be alone. Looking up into the stars, we see them in the same light.
Everything has been covered, but on the Retrograde, there was a couple of pre-existing shows that had already received the My Anime Podcast grading, and we had to assign them a score. Those shows really quickly were Your Lie in April, Nemo's Adventures in Slumberland, Steins Gate, Promare, Run with the Wind, and Carol and Tuesday. Now, we're going to go through those scores really, really quickly, and if we wish to change them, now that we have graded everything, we have the benefit of hindsight and kind of relationality and context for those scores, we can change them now, and then that's it. We have officially set this Retrograde into stone. So really quickly, I'll do Your Lie in April and we can alternate. So for Your Lie in April, it got a 4.75 out of 5. Characters, I gave it a 4, Taka gave it a 5. Plot, I gave it a 4.5, Taka gave it a 4. Visual art, I gave it a 5, as did Taka. Sound, I gave it a 5, as did Taka. Enjoyment, I gave it a 5, as did Taka. 4.75 out of 5 for Your Lie in April. And for me personally, I'm totally happy with that grading. Show is exceptional, and I think it's reflected in the score. What about yourself?
Sounds about right to me. I think we were already on top of our rating scale at this time. We knew what we were doing. This being tied with Vinland Saga makes sense. It was equally good in very different ways, but very strong.
They would both have you boo-hooing at the end anyway, so what else could you want? Okay, up next is
Nemo's Adventure in Slumberland. If you want to hear our full thoughts, it was from episode 99. Our final score was 2.55 for this one, quite a bit lower. Not the lowest yet, but pretty low. Characters 2.0 apiece. Plot 3.0 from Yata, 2.5 from myself. Visual art 3.5 from Yata, 2.5 from myself. Sound 3.0 from Yata, 2.0 from myself. And enjoyment 3.0, Yata 2 for myself. This one seems about right from what I remember it. I definitely am on the same level enjoyment wise. It's hard to do the technical stuff from memory, but sounds right to me.
Yeah, I'm happy enough with this one. Fraught productions are fraught and they are reflected in mediocre scores. Had high elements, but had a lot of elements that were overly flowery, a little bit lame, I would say. It just felt dated. Next up from episode 100 and episode 1, Steins Gate. Characters were a 5 apiece from both of us. Plot was a 5 apiece from both of us. The visual arts was a 4.5 from both of us. Sound was a 5.0 from both of us. Enjoyment was a 5.0 from both of us. We gave it a 4.9 out of 5. It's the highest rated show in my anime podcast history. How do we feel about that, Taka?
It feels biased. I'm not going to lie. I can't pull my punches here. Steins Gate, we've done you twice now. Some of these scores make sense. The plot and the characters were phenomenal. This was one of the reasons that we felt so strongly about doing a podcast about anime. The visual art at 4.5, is that right? For its time, probably. But how do we compare that to things that came out this year? That could be a point of debate. As it is, though, I think I'm happy leaving it.
All right, he's coming in with a chair. I'm going to drop the visual art to a 4.
Okay.
And I'm going to leave it at that. I was thinking about sound as well. I think a lot of the visual art for me is graded in the amazing character design. While the animation is solid, I don't think it's a 4.5 out of 5. Like, no, it's not solid. It's better than solid. It's really, really good. But it's not a 4.5 out of 5 for me. It just seems a bit of a stretch, and a lot of that was weighted towards the characters, but there's a lot of great character designs. And then I'm kind of wondering, am I letting the character section influence the visual art section? You know what, it's called spade a spade. Let's just drop it down a little bit lower. A 4.85 is still good. It's still the best show. So this is not a completely useless exercise. Steins Gate has been tweaked ever so slightly.
Moving on to the next show, Promare was in episode 102. We experienced the movie from Studio Trigger. Characters 3 apiece. Plot 3.5 apiece, visual art 5 apiece, sound 5 apiece. Enjoyment was the only difference. Yata said 3 and I said 3.5, and that ended up with a total score of 3.95.
I'm very happy with this score. It's a good movie, but it's not without its flaws.
I'm in full agreement as I was. This was not from that long ago, so I don't think anything's really changed since then.
Speaking of not long ago, Run with the Wind from episode 107. This episode was the episode I bowed out of grading because I just felt I was too biased. Since then, I have watched it again.
How many times is that now?
Oh, dude, I don't even know. 6?
Woo!
I literally finished it about 3 weeks ago, I would say. So basically, Taka gave it a 5.0 for characters, plot, and enjoyment. He gave it a 4 for visual arts and 4.5 for sound. And I decided to match him. I agree with all of the scores, and it means that Run with the Wind has a 4.7 out of 5. It's a 5 in my heart. Damn it, it's a 7 in my heart.
Yeah.
But it's a 4.7 on paper.
Definitely one of those where the cap at 5 is really felt in some of the categories.
Yeah. There's the odd occasion where that is the case. Characters in Shogun Roku. Plot in Shogun Roku. Everything in Run with the Wind.
Yeah.
It's my favorite anime. I've come to accept that fact now. I'm delighted it got a good score. Speaking of not good scores.
Speaking of the opposite of that.
And maybe from being like overly nice to being overly aggressive, Carol and Tuesday. For characters, I gave it a 2.0. Taka gave it a 2.0. Whew. Plot was a 2.0 for myself and a 2.0 from Taka. Visual art was a 2.5 for myself and a 2.5 from Taka. Sound was a 4 from myself and a 3.5 for Taka. Enjoyment, I gave it a 3.0 and Taka gave it a 3.5. So we agreed on the score and it ended up at a 2.7 out of 5 for Carol and Tuesday. There was a bit of crackback on this one.
Yeah, the final score is definitely lower than where I would have guessed. If we were still doing seat of your pants letter grades, this probably would have come in a bit higher.
Like a B- or something like that.
But when you really break it down, there were just too many flaws. There was too many nits to pick in each one of these categories, including the sound. I wasn't even all that impressed with the OST, which so many people were lauding as just being this amazing thing that it wasn't even top 3 Watanabe soundtracks in my heart, which is hard to do. That's a very hard list. That's like a whole episode in the future maybe, but
yeah, man, I agree with you. I went back and actually listened to this episode again just to see if I was being too harsh. And I felt like the points were valid. Maybe they were a little bit more critical on elements than I normally would have been. But for whatever reason, there was just elements of the show that really rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like the passivity of the characters. I didn't like their lack of a personality and how similar they were. The side characters were fun. The plot was a mess in places. I think they should have just stuck to one of the 2 plots that they were trying to thread. Individual episodes were great. Some songs were great too. Like, I'm not going to lie, I actually do enjoy the music. Not all of it. Basically, anything that Carol and Tuesday sang, just not that, right? Yesterday, as I was thinking about the grading again, I went back and spanned a few of the tracks. Like, you know that Angela song, Lights Go Out? You and I are perfect strangers. We never want to be alone. That song's fire. And I still like Piotr's song. They're just fun, infectious pop songs. And that's fine if they were couched as that in the narrative, as opposed to being, this is literally the best stuff you've ever heard. This is the music that will literally change the fate of a colony and a people. Put it this way, I don't feel like it's right, but I also don't feel like it's wrong either. So I'm just going to do nothing like Carol and Tuesday did.
Yeah. I'm going to play the passive role here and just let it be.
Now, as I say, we're not authorities on the matter. It's just our opinion, and you're more than welcome to disagree with us. And people let me know about Carol and Tuesday, trust me. I've never had as much clapback. Are you not entertained? At least it got you tapping away in your tapping machines. So, job done, right?
Job done.
Okay, that is the grading done. Over the next couple of weeks and months and years and days and hours and minutes, I will compile that, stick it on the website, and you can see the total catalogue in its entirety. And we get to add to it in the future now because we are finished with the past and we're going to go on to the new. So here's what we have planned for the time being. We are going to start a brand new shiny schedule at the end of the currently airing season, which is the spring season. Until then, we're going to have a couple filler episodes, do a couple of 5-star reviews, and do a couple of episodes that are, I guess, a little bit self-gratifying in the respect that Taka's going to choose a 12-episode anime for us to cover. Could be whatever he wants. I think he's going to choose Baccano. I don't know why. There you go. Now, if you pick Baccano, you're going to look like a right stooge.
Can I guess what you're going to choose then?
Yes, you can guess.
We're going to do, let me tune into my KyoAni vibes and wavelengths. Sound Euphonium.
Yes. I'll give you some honest to goodness. I was actually, honest to goodness. I was going to choose Love, Chinibyo, and Other Delusions. I think it's hilarious. And I was in the mood to watch it again. And it's so funny and so great. But I was also remembering the fact that we do have a Sound Euphonium 5-star review, and I do love birds and I do love stones, and clipping a couple of birds with one stone seems like a good idea. You got a little bit more freedom, but feel free to choose something from the 5-star review list if you choose. No one's going to stop you. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to be back in 2 weeks to discuss something that we have not discussed in the podcast before. So maybe it's Sound Euphonium, maybe it's something else. Stay tuned and find out next time on My Anime Podcast. Until then, for our listeners, bye, love you, bye.
Scraw!